Well, it looks like the IDF's mission in Hamas is winding down. hmm They're going to start fighting Hezbollah, which in a way may be less daunting for them because they, let's just say, Hezbollah in a lot of ways is way worse than Hamas because they've got more weaponry, more soldiers. They're almost actually an army, a military, where Hamas is just a bunch of ragtag. I mean, they got uniforms, but they're mostly just, they're not what you'd call professional soldiers. Hezbollah, it mostly is. In fact, Iran, unlike Gaza, Iran actually has people on the ground in Lebanon, military advisors. And it's a lot easier to get weapons in there. But unfortunately, just like the Gazans, I call them, I don't call them Palestinians, I call them Gazans, because in a way, there is no Palestinian individual. That's all a, you know what? That's just all a social construct created around Jesus' time, like 100 BC, 100 AD, roughly when the Romans were there. See, it was called Judea Samaria, that part of where Gaza is. It wasn't called Palestine. No. In fact, if you go back to the original, the only Bible I recognize, the Old Testament, that land was never referred to Palestine in the Old Testament. Never was. Maybe the New Testament, but I don't know. The Old Testament, it was referred to as the land of Canaan, because a lot of the original Jews were called Canaanites, where the Hebrew words for like the land of milk and honey. But it was called the land of Canaan, or referred to also as Israel. No, not really back then. It wasn't called Israel. And the Jews were called Hebrews. But where does the term Jew come from? From Judea. And Judea is exactly where Gaza is right now. The only reasons it's called Palestine is the Romans kicked most of the Jews out and decided to call it Palestine after the Philistines. And you know what? Even up until the 40s, 1948, when the British had control of it, then prior to that, the Ottoman Empire, guess what? I don't even think they called it the Palestinian territory at that point. They didn't call Israel Israel, and they didn't call that land Palestine either. No. It wasn't really called Palestine. And if it was only because the Romans stole it from the Jews, kicked them out, and called it Palestine after the Philistines. But most of the people who claim to be quote-unquote Palestinians are basically descendants of Egyptians and Jordanians. They're basically just Arabs. I mean, you could call them Palestinians, you could call them... Now, obviously, the Egyptians look a little darker than your typical Arab because they're from northern Africa, and the Egyptians are not Arabs, they're Egyptians. But everybody else is an Arab over there. The Jordanians are Arabs, the Saudi Arabians are Arabs, the Lebanese are Arabs. Iran is not made up of Arabs. They're made up of They're Persians. Big difference. Yemen, Arab, Qatar, UAE, where Dubai is, all this bullshit. So why press the Palestinian cause? Well, after World War II, when Israel decided they're going to become a state, according to the Balfour Agreement and according to, let's be realistic. Back then, that land was all fucking desert. Nobody really wanted it. Let's be quite frank. Nobody was scammering to get that land. They weren't. There weren't even a lot of people over there. Not millions, but a few 100,000. So it wasn't like, And we all know that land's Jewish land. It says in the Bible. Specifically says Moses crossed the Red Sea, took the Jews out of Egypt and into the, like I said, they refer to this land of Canaan. But it's basically where Israel is, Jerusalem. We all know that Jesus came out of Jerusalem. And this notion that European Jews are not real Jews is all bullshit. Because even the Ashkenazi Jews, which come out of Eastern Europe, they can all trace their roots back to one of the 12 tribes of Israel. I can. It's not that hard. How hard could it be? We go back a couple thousand years, 1,500 years, and, it's just passed down to us. We know where our roots are. We know. Like if no Jew had been kicked out of that land, we'd all be living in there. That's where we're from. Why do you think I live out in Palm Springs? I like the desert. See? I like heat. You see? So I could plop my ass down in Israel and I would feel right at home. In fact, it's cooler there than here. So basically, we're just desert people. We came from the desert. That's our land. And nobody wants these Palestinians because they are radical Islamic terrorists. I know. It's like one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist and vice versa. The reality is the Egyptians don't want them. The Jordanians don't want them because they know these people are trouble. See? See, they're smarter than us. You know how we're letting all these Venezuelan and Mexican gangs up through our southern border? These people don't want that shit. They just don't. And the only reason the Palestinians exist as a proxy to Iran is to keep the Iranians happy because they don't like the state of Israel. It's weird, man. You got all these Arab countries surrounding one little piece of land the size of New Jersey, and these guys are freaking out over it. It's amazing. But the Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. These people, 48 and 57, then during 67, 6-Day War, 66, 67, in the 70s, 80s, every decade these people have had an opportunity to create a two-state solution, and they refuse. Why? Because they don't want Israel there. It's plain, they don't. But that's all going to change. It's changing now because you know what happens. We cleaned out at least half of those Hamas terrorists. A few civilians. It wasn't that bad. For every one terrorist, I think there was just 1 or 1.5 civilians shot in Gaza, which is, we went into Fallujah in Iraq, and for every terrorist we shot, we got like 9 or 10 civilians. So this was a very clean operation. The pager operation the Jews did, the Mossad did, the walkie-talkies, it's just brilliant. Yeah, if they picked the pager up and looked at it to get a number, their eyes blew out, so they're blind now and they're useless. And if they kept the pager on their belt, their penis blew up, their balls, they can't reproduce. So it was very, very targeted. People are complaining, well, they booby-trapped. It's war. What do you expect them to do? send a nice box wrapped up and say, we've got a pager in here that will blow up if you answer it? Of course not. So that's how it went down.